Isn't it time that we require that the Prime Minister and party leaders fully sell controlled assets within 30 days of taking office?
Cornerstone of the Conflict of Interest Act is transparency, and yet when it comes to the ethics screen that had been set up by the Ethics Commissioner in respect of Mr. Carney, there is complete opaqueness. There is no transparency. Would you agree with that?
Mr. Carney could control the country's economic agenda while personally benefiting it to the tune of tens of millions of dollars, and Canadians may not even know about what kind of benefit he's deriving from the decisions he's making.
This time like to move a motion, but I put on notice the motion calls upon the Prime Minister to come clean and disclose exactly who he met with.
I'm sad this is where we are heading.
This Guy's Garage. Like and subscribe.
The second hour, we have two individuals who are appearing. First of all, Mr. Gregory J. Levine, who's lawyer and ethics consultant, social scientist. So welcome, Mr. Levine. And Mr. Guy Giorno, who is appearing as an individual. And Mr. Giorno is a lawyer.
Mr. Giorno, would you agree that banning ministers from holding assets in tax haven jurisdictions is a simple but effective way to strengthen Canadians' trust that ministers and the Prime Minister aren't hiding conflicts in conflicts of interest offshore?
I'm not sure how simple it is, but there are some things that we get done. So first of all, I would, it's easy to legislate that people who are public office holders, and we're talking about only 3,000 people or fewer, should be residents of Canada, so they can't take advantage of residing somewhere else. And then as long as they can't be operating a company, or at least a reporting public office holder is not permitted by law to operate a company or a business. They should be running businesses that are operating in tax havens. Beyond that, with a definition that should be workable. I'll note that it's very important to ensure that our reporting public office holders have investments in places where there is transparency and disclosure. And if one of the attributes we know as a tax haven is there's no transparency and no disclosure, it actually frustrates the work of the Act and the Commissioner in enforcing the Act.
If senior staff for these public office holders have to publicly disclose their finances, why shouldn't, or I guess I could ask, should that same transparency apply to party leaders and leadership candidates who seek to govern the country? And let me add a bit of a precision here. When I talk about party leaders, in elections in recent years, to earn a seat on the debate stage, for example, that's been confined to people who are reasonably expected to hold official party status, have seats in the House of Commons. So for the sake of this conversation, let's not just say anyone who is defined as a party, but a party who might hold seats in the House of Commons. The leader of a party who might reasonably be expected to elect members to the House.
So that's a legitimate policy suggestion. I don't actually have a view on that. I do note that it raises the question of who will regulate it, whether it will be the regulator of our elections, or the chief electoral officer, or the regulator of this Act. But it's certainly open for discussion to expand the scope of people who are made to disclose, for sure.
So the Act defines divestment to include keeping assets in a blind trust. It's a loophole. I don't think for a second that when Canadians hear that someone says, well, I've divested my assets, so the question of conflicts of interest, the questions of transparency have all been answered. Isn't it time that we require that the Prime Minister and party leaders fully sell controlled assets within 30 days of taking office? So we're being specific here. We're not talking about their home, but controlled assets.
That again, Chair, is a policy proposal. It's certainly worthy of discussion. I'll simply note the following things: that the member's right, divestment is defined to include not divestment, which is a challenge. The second thing is the Commissioner has told us that the assets in these blind trusts are not mixing or churning the way one would expect them to, which does create a problem that people then know what's in their blind trust when the whole purpose of the trust is they're not supposed to. And I'll add that I do agree with the Commissioner that if there is to be mandatory real divestment, not blind trusts, that a solution would be to offset or compensate public office holders so they're made whole. I mean, the taxes on capital gains go to the Crown anyway, so the Crown can easily forego those for the sake of making the Conflict of Interest Act work if that's what Parliament decides is necessary.
And there are currently costs that go with the management of blind trust as well. Who pays to manage the trust?
The Crown.
You talked about the Act being, quote, toothless. So if we were to make if we were to give it real teeth by allowing meaningful fines, and you did speak to some of what you thought was material or immaterial in terms of amounts, and you referenced jail time. You said there's no one's getting arrested, no one's paying fines. Would $10,000 fines for serious ethical breaches, instead of just limiting penalties to paperwork errors, do you think that would serve as sufficient deterrent for the people who'd hold these offices?
No, I think that making something an offense and allowing for prosecution and conviction by the courts with real fines or imprisonment is the way to do it. But I'll add that, Chair, in response to the question, I have to say that may mean that some things go out of the law. The problem with making this an act and not having penalties is that you're actually giving the illusion that it means something, right? Every other time, most of the times Parliament enacts something, it adds penalties. We have laws that govern marine transportation, our railways, our airports, our customs and all that. And generally when Parliament legislates, those who break the rules are subject to either administrative monetary penalties or most often prosecution and real penalties. The problem with this act is it's kind of illusory. It looks like it means something because it's in an act, but it's not there. So the answer to the question is I think there should be real penalties, including the possibility of jail time, but that may mean that some rules have to be stripped out of the act if they are the kind of rules that ought not to be amenable to those harsher consequences.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Barrett. Mr. Gion?
You were Chief of Staff to the Prime Minister Harper. Was there such a thing as blind trust and screens at that time? And were you entrusted to take control of those, similar to what's happening today?
The first answer, Chair, is yes. There were blind trusts and there were screens. They existed. Mr. Harper didn't have any, so I didn't administer them. My successor had one, and it was administered by the Deputy Chief of Staff.
So Deputy Chief of Staff, who does...
Well, yeah, Nigel Rice was administered by the Deputy Chief of Staff because Nigel was the Chief of Staff.
No, but the Deputy Chief of Staff, who did he also reported to the Prime Minister, did he not?
No, he reported to the Chief of Staff whose screen he was administering. So it's exactly, in the Harper government, exactly what we're talking about took place.
So what is the issue today when it wasn't the issue 15 years ago?
I don't know. I'll say this, Chair. There are three pieces to the transparency of a screen, and two are already legislated and should be happening. So first of all, the screen itself is supposed to be reported and published. And I believe I see people in this room who I believe have had their screens published. So that exists. Number two, recusals, when they happen, are supposed to be published and reported, and they're publicly available. The missing piece is when a staff member or the screen administrator screens something away so it never gets to the public office holder, there is a gap in the Act. The Act doesn't say that needs to be reported somewhere, and that could be fixed up. But the existence of screens, the Act's been around 18 and a half years, screens have been around for 18 and a half years.
Thank you. You have noted that the voluntary political activity should be automatically be treated as lobbying. How can parliamentarians best draw the line between legitimate voluntary political activity and the compensated lobbying so the rules remains fair and constitutional?
Oh, I don't think Chair, I have said that. I actually believe that voluntary activity should not be treated as lobbying, and I oppose moves to expand lobbying regulation to cover things people do for free. There are jurisdictions that do regulate it, but I don't support that, and I don't advocate moving to that federally.
You have warned that merging the Office of Ethics and Lobbying Commissioner could create confusion and weaken expertise. Instead of merging, what practical coordination tools, such as joint guidance or shared definition, would best serve Canadian and strengthen each office mandate?
So exactly that, Chair. But those things could. Shared definitions could, joint guidance could, and in fact the two commissioners, Commissioner of Lobbying, the Conflict of Interest Ethics Commissioner, have collaborated. They have shared guidance on the acceptable limits for meals and hospitality. They actually work together and do try to dovetail their work. So exactly what the member has asked about, I think is a better solution than merger.
Mr. Levine, your viewpoint on that issue?
Sorry, I have nothing really to add to that.
Okay. The current act includes a 5-year post-employment lobbying ban for designated public office holder. Is the length and scope of that restriction still appropriate today? And how could it be improved to protect the integrity without discouraging qualified people from public service?
Who are you directing your question to, sir?
Mr. Guerrero,
Mr.
please.
Jarno.
Chair, I think 5 years is appropriate. I know that some people on the Hill question that, but the purpose of the ban is to ensure that people who, in the service of the Crown, for which they get paid a salary, amass a network of contacts, contacts which belong to the people of Canada because they were amassed on the taxpayer's dime, don't turn around and use those contacts to fuel their lobbying practice. So 5 years was seen as an appropriate amount of time by Parliament at the time, and I think that that's the case. I know that many people end up in lobbying, and it's a valid profession, it's a lawful profession, it's a helpful profession. It actually is important to development of public policy, but I would hope that nobody goes into government hoping to come out lobbying, and if that's the sort of person who is affected by 5 years, then I'm not sure that is a public policy problem.
Mr. Levine, continuing the discussion around ethics screens, the cornerstone of the Conflict of Interest Act is transparency, and yet when it comes to the ethics screen that had been set up by the Ethics Commissioner in respect of Mr. Carney, there is complete opaqueness. There is no transparency. Would you agree with that?
Well, I'm sort of loath to comment on specific screens, but I think in just my general comment that they have the potential to mask conflicts rather than to make them open. So I'll leave it at that.
Fair enough. Professor Stedman, when I asked him about the ethics screen, what confidence or how would Canadians know whether it was being triggered when it ought to be in the face of Mr. Carney's multitude of conflicts of interest, he said his answer was trust and faith, nothing more. I would submit that's not good enough. Would you agree?
Well, yeah, I think there needs to be, if you're going to use screens, I'd prefer some sort of legislative scheme that said how they had to be set up. And I do take the point that if you have employees monitoring it, that's an issue.
Well, and when you say employees monitoring
this.
Here we have a screen that is being administered by the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff and the Clerk of the Privy Council, both of whom answer to the Prime Minister and serve at the pleasure of the Prime Minister. That is a conflict, is it not?
Well, potentially, yeah.
It's
It is, and it goes back to something I was thinking about before, or saying before about the blind trust. I mean, either it's working or it's not, and then you seem to have a screen to try to make sure there are no conflicts. The relationship needs to be clarified.
And would you support some level of oversight by the Ethics Commissioner, some sort of reporting mechanism? What would you recommend in that regard?
Yeah, both, actually. I think both those things. The Ethics Commissioner obviously knows there are screens, but yeah, there needs to be a third party watching this. And
I would just observe that with respect to Mr. Carney's so-called ethics screen, there is no oversight by the Ethics Commissioner. There is no oversight from anyone other than the Chief of Staff and the Clerk of the Privy Council, both of whom are conflicted. There is no public reporting mechanism. There hasn't even been transparency around how the ethics screen is supposed to work and how decisions are made. And so I would submit that in the face of the most conflicted Prime Minister in Canadian history, Canadians deserve a whole lot better than what is nothing more than a smokescreen. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Journo, so is a public office holder restricted in the instructions provided to a trustee, in the instructions that they may provide to a trustee in a blind trust?
Yes, there are restrictions. There can be general guidance given, but not specific restrictions related to the active management of the trust. That it's going to be blind.
What would the purpose of that be?
What would the purpose?
What would the purpose of limiting the public office holder's ability to issue instructions be?
The purpose would be to ensure the trust is blind, and that there's a separation between what's happening inside the trust and what the public office holder is aware of. Reporting public office holder, is aware of.
Mm-hmm. And is a trustee under any obligation to accept guidance from a public office holder?
No, quite the contrary. The trustee can't accept guidance, and that which we said in the trust instrument, the Act provides what it's to say, and the Commissioner will not approve an instrument setting up the trust if it doesn't provide for the proper separation between the reporting public office holder and the trustee.
Mm-hmm. And what, if any, constraints exist on the information that's provided to a public office holder about the composition or the performance of any assets in a blind trust?
The only thing that the reporting public office holder who has assets in a blind trust is entitled to receive are reports on the total valuation, and there's a section of the Act that says any other information that's needed for legal requirements. So anything that the public officer may have to file, the trustee is able to tell the RPOH that. That's it.
So once a blind trust is established or is in the process of being established, if I understand you correctly, the person establishing that blind trust has almost no ability to provide instructions to the trustee on how that trust should be managed. And in fact, the Commissioner would step in if such instruction was given.
Yes, it should step in, yes.
Should step in?
Yes.
That a trustee is actually bound not to accept guidance on the composition of the trust once it's established. They have an obligation to maintain the trust independently, blindly, and that there are strict constraints limiting any information on the performance and composition of the trust once it's operational.
Yes, all those things are correct, and the trustee is supposed to, it can't be like your brother-in-law or sister-in-law. It's got to be somebody who's in the business of doing this, a financial institution or an individual who manages assets for a living, and the Commissioner will also have a say on that.
Okay.
Mr. Journo, let me thank you for your service. I was a public office holder for a time when we overlapped, and I wanted to ask you first a little bit about the difference between consequences and accountability. Your testimony described how there's not much accountability beyond public embarrassment or shame if people contravene the act, except for minor infractions. Is that right?
The short answer is yes. The longer answer is that the act was intentionally developed by people who thought that that was okay.
Right. I recall, though, that there was another layer of accountability that came straight from the top during the Harper government, meaning your contribution to ensuring that public office holders, members of parliament, cabinet members were held to a higher standard by your office, the Prime Minister's office. Does that seem a fair representation, knowing what the Act had and the standards you'd held for the government?
Well, thanks, Chair. The answer is yes. I thank the member for saying that. I think I tried to do that, but I don't think that was a substitute for the deficiencies in the Act. But yes, we tried to be very vigilant about this and very firm about these things.
Yeah, it comes from the top. And I'm asking that question because it speaks to the nature of the kind of leadership we have and the potential conflict that they're in. Just to be clear, and I know this might seem a bit repetitive, the Conflict of Interest Act clearly applies to the Prime Minister. He's not above that in any way, right?
That's correct.
Okay. Of its 55 rules, 40 carry no actual penalty if broken.
That is correct.
So if the Prime Minister, if Mark Carney breached the most serious conflict rules, there would be no fine, no charge, no penalty.
That is correct. There would be, in theory, a potential report by the Commissioner that was made public.
A report. Sections 8 and 9 forbid using public office to further personal interests if Mr. Carney's decisions benefited assets he knows about placed under those so-called blind trust, in this so-called blind trust. That would qualify under those sections, right?
I wouldn't want to go that far because those are what the sections say, for sure, Chair. Those are what the sections say, but I would hesitate to apply facts to law not knowing all the facts. But those are certainly sections that would come into play. But I'd defer to the Commissioner's interpretation of how they apply to those facts.
The facts can be murky because if his assets remain undisclosed, there's no way for Canadians to even know if a conflict exists, right?
Yes, but the Commissioner knows his assets. The Commissioner knows all assets in blind trusts and not in blind trusts.
Right. And so if Mr. Carney was meeting with money managers in places like New York and elsewhere, knowing what constitutes what assets he may have held in the blind trust before it went into blind trust, there's really no appreciation for to what degree he's making decisions, promoting specific deals that would benefit his own portfolio holdings. There's no transparency around that, right?
There is no public transparency. The Commissioner does have the tools to deal with that. Whether the Commissioner has the resources to deal with that's another story, but certainly the Commissioner should know what's in blind trusts, and the Commissioner should know what's in personal assets not in blind trusts.
Okay. And Section 21 requires recusal from any matter where there is a conflict.
Yes.
And if Mr. Carney makes policy decisions that affect his own undisclosed investments, there's technically no enforceable consequence. Is that fair?
That is correct. There's also a requirement to disclose the recusals under Section 25, but that's correct. There are no penalties for not doing either.
But incentives for the decisions that he might make. So Mr. Carney could control the country's economic agenda while personally benefiting it from to the tune of tens of millions of dollars. And Canadians may not even know about what kind of benefit he's deriving from the decisions he's making.
Some of those facts I'm not aware of, but it is true that these things are known only to the public office holders and the Commissioner, except for what is disclosed on the public registry.
Would you agree then if that this loophole allows the appearance, if not the reality, but perhaps the reality even, of serious conflicts of interest from the Prime Minister as it's established today?
Chair, I'm not sure which loophole the member is referring to. I think there are many.
Well, that would be great for you to enumerate the many.
In as short a time as possible.
Well, the absence of penalties is one of them, obviously. I think that's the largest. The fact that divestment is defined to include not divestment is another. But the reality is that the Commissioner does know more than we know. So the way the act should work is the commissioner and the reporting public office holder should have equal knowledge of what is going on, and the commissioner should be there and has the power to initiate without even a complaint where the problem.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would at this time like to move a motion that I put on notice on October the 1st.
Go ahead.
And the motion calls upon the Prime Minister to come clean and disclose exactly who he met with and who they represented and the particulars of what was discussed when the Prime Minister met in New York City and in London, England, with leading global investment leaders.
I'd just like to know exactly what the position is here.
The motion was put on notice October 1st? October 1st. So Mr. Cooper has moved the motion now that was on notice, and it was distributed to all members. Every member has a copy of that notice and that motion. So he properly moved the motion just now, and he's speaking to the motion. He has the floor. So if anybody, and Ms. Lapointe is afterwards. So everything is in order here. So.
But I thought that we were here to better the ethic legislation. What I see happening here is my colleagues on the other side have nothing more than to attack the current Prime Minister, who was elected by Canadians, knowing fully well what he was doing compared to the leader of the opposition, who even couldn't hold his own seat. And this is a sad, sad situation that we are just talking about one person. This is not the Ethics Committee's role. And I'm sad this is where we are heading.
Well, I'm sorry to interrupt the member opposite's dinner plans, Chair. I think this is an important matter. We have, as Mr. Cooper articulated, a situation that's extraordinary. And we can go back several months to lay out the situation that Canadians are facing.
Well, Mr. Chair, my colleague, the member opposite, talks a lot about trust in institutions. But I would argue to this committee that what we're actually witnessing is an undermining of the trust in our institutions.
Do I have consensus on this, or do we need to go to a vote? Okay, we're going to go to a vote. Madam Chair, will you take the roll, please? Thank you. Oh, sorry. 1 steamboat, 2 steamboat. No other hands. Go ahead, Madam Clerk.
The vote is on the motion moved by Mr. Cooper. Ms. Church.
Opposed?
No.
Madame Lapointe. Called. Mr. Seni.
Against.
Monsieur Sari.
Contre.
Mr. Barrett.
In favor.
Mr. Cooper.
In favor?
Mr. Workington.
In favor.
Here, here.
Monsieur Therrien.
Oui.
Yeas 4, nays 4.
And the chair votes yes.
So yeas 5, nays 4.
Okay, the motion carries.